Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. Today's new episode is the 101st interview in this awesome podcast series. I invite you to scroll through my entire catalog of past episodes to listen to them all. Today's podcast features my interview with Kyle G., whose 3 years of continuous sobriety is relatively brief compared to other guests with double-digit sobriety. But the how it was and the what happened parts of his story are every bit as powerful as those of AA members who have enjoyed decades of sobriety. For many of us, the recency of Kyle's experience is a raw reminder that the disease is as brutal as ever, offering little respite to those who suffer. In Kyle's case, a difficult childhood led into early drug and alcohol use. As alcoholism and addiction surfaced during his later teenage years, Kyle was placed in a rehab as a high school junior, but it had little effect on the burgeoning disease that he resumed immediately thereafter. A hope for recovery in the U.S. Air Force largely failed when Kyle's alcoholic blackout during a deployment caused even more trouble. Once out of the service, he resumed his addictions, though, like many, he was still able to marry and have children and a job despite his active disease. He even managed to stay dry for 5 years, but without a program, he was mostly miserable along the way. By the time he got sober, he'd been thoroughly beaten by the disease and ready to take certain steps toward recovery. 3 years later, through working the steps with a sponsor, Kyle's sobriety is demonstrated by his sponsorship of other men and his attendance at daily meetings. It's a far cry from where he was when he got to AA, but he's taking nothing for granted, as his disease seems to be residing around every corner. Kyle's is a cautionary tale that's instructive of many of the do's and don'ts that are so prevalent in Alcoholics Anonymous. I think you'll get a lot out of this interview, and I invite you to enjoy listening to this episode of AA Recovery Interviews with my friend and AA brother, Kyle G.
Hi, my name is Kyle, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Kyle. Thanks for being on the AA Recovery Interviews podcast with me this evening.
Thanks, Howard. Glad to be here, and thank you for asking me.
So you and I have been just at one of the great meetings that we attend here. It was a really good topic today. Quit playing God or something along those lines.
I've noticed a pattern recently in my behavior of getting really worked up about things, then sort of not caring, and everything turning out all right, and me trying to play God, and that, I want everybody around me to do it just as I want. But I think, I've been able to shorten the amount of time that I stay in that place,
That's what I've found over the years, is that the amount of time in between acting and reacting, it gets adjusted by the fact of what I'm actually doing. So if I do something wrong and need to make amends, the time between the act and making the amends has become much more abbreviated in working the program. Now, how long have you been sober now?
January 1st of 2020, so I'm coming up on 3 years.
Well, you and I will have the opportunity to celebrate on the same day, because my AA birthday is January 1st as well.
Yeah.
Were you actually drinking on the 31st and stopped on the 1st? What did that scene look like?
I had been coming to meetings for a little bit before then, but yeah, so I drank on the 31st. On the 1st, I was kind of like, I'm done. And my sort of OCD brain, liked the idea of calendar year. And so it wasn't like a New Year's resolution that I just woke up and was like, all right, I'm going to stop drinking now.
Had you ever made resolutions in the past to stop?
Yeah, I was sober for almost 5 years when I was younger, from 21 to 25, but I didn't work a program. I just white-knuckled it, dry drunk for almost 5 years.
Why did you get dry at that point? Why did you stop drinking for 5 years?
I'd gotten in a bunch of trouble in the Air Force. I got an Article 15 non-judicial punishment, lost a stripe related to my drinking. That didn't stop me from drinking. I was a bad drunk, and I was, blackout drinker, get into fights, do crazy things. And I had gone to Iraq for 5 months. When I got back, I had 2 weeks off. but I was drunk for 2 weeks straight. And
Wow.
my alcoholism, not PTSD or something like that,
Right.
And I'd gotten in almost every night of that, couple weeks, something bad had happened. I got into a fight. I got us thrown out of a bar. I did something to make an ass out of myself, whatever. And the last night I drank for that period, we were at a bar. I'd done some stupid stuff and started a fight. And the guy tried to throw a punch at me. I ducked and he punched my roommate in the face. And he was understandably mad at me.
I'll bet.
And I just remember just being really drunk. And I remember I called my parents at like 3 o'clock in the morning, drunk as I could be.
Now, where did all this happen?
In Grand Forks, North Dakota. Yep, I'm 21, I guess. And I called my parents. My dad's just like, I'm telling him what happened, being belligerent and all this other stuff. And my dad's just like, dude, you're an alcoholic. He's like, you need to go to bed. And when you wake up, you need to go to a meeting. And you're just an alcoholic. So I did. I went to one AA meeting. I can't for the life of remember why I didn't stay. I don't remember picking up a desire chip. I did get a book. I remember a guy giving me a book, and I still have the book that I got.
Yeah.
I met my now wife a couple weeks after I stopped drinking. And so when I stopped that time, it wasn't like, oh, I'm quitting drinking forever. It was like, I'm just taking a little break. And a couple weeks turned into a couple months, turned into almost 5 years. Over that time, my life got way better. I got out of the military. Me and Kristen were starting our life together. I got into the University of Texas. Like my life was getting exponentially better, but I was miserable on the inside, very much a dry drunk. As I was turning into a hermit, it's like I couldn't go out. If you were drinking, I was like, I can't be around it, and
So that you really were white knuckling it, weren't?
I was white knuckling it. And
Sobriety, they call it. Returning to one thing that you just said about your dad saying you need to go to a meeting, how did he know of going to meetings?
So my dad has struggled with drugs and alcohol in his youth and growing up. And then for me, I spent the second half of my junior year in high school in rehab.
So you were exposed to AA all along, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
I ended up, after I started drinking again, after that, 5 years or whatever, I drank for 10 more years. And it wasn't till the very end, obviously, despite my background and my history of rehab and going to that one AA meeting, and AA was not in my consciousness.
Yeah.
And it never occurred to me that like, oh, I should go to an AA meeting. And even though like things were really bad, it wasn't like I was like, I'm not choosing not going to AA meetings or something like that. It just wasn't even something that crossed my mind.
So you're talking about a period of time between your
25 to 35.
Yeah, so from 25 to 35, you drank, but we're talking about a period of, you were about 15 when you were in the rehab, and you were in it for a considerable length of time.
I did 30 days inpatient and 30 days outpatient 8 to 8, Monday through Friday.
What was your exposure to Alcoholics Anonymous when you were in the rehab?
We did some step work. I don't remember ever going to meetings. Like we never went to a meeting outside of the treatment facility.
Were those like facilitated meetings, or were those like the traditional AA meeting?
No, it was more like group therapy is what I think, is more what I remember. I have a very bad memory from a lot of drug use, and when I was in high school, huffing air freshener was one of my drugs of choice, and I think that has killed a lot of my brain. And so I don't I remember having some step worksheets and stuff like that.
But nothing like a real indoctrination into AA. That's interesting. I always am concerned and sometimes curious about the process of the handoff between rehab and AA. And of course, rehab has every interest in the world of making sure that you get sober, but then at the end of that time, or when your money is run out, whatever, and you're put out onto the street, figuratively speaking.
Right.
Some rehabs do better than others in indoctrinating people into AA so that when that time comes, they leave rehab, they leave sober living, whatever it is, and they engage in AA all along. But it sounds like that wasn't the case where you were.
So in high school, I would have considered myself more of a drug addict than, I mean, I certainly drank a ton, but I was more into drugs. And I remember I went to some NA meetings in high school after rehab. I don't think that I went to an AA meeting until that first time when I was in the Air Force. I think it was NA, which shaped my view of AA. You know, I had so I went to NA in Memphis, which, you know, a lot of the meetings were with homeless people, with, you know, it was a very low bottom crowd, you know. I didn't want to go to AA even when I was looking to get sober at 35.
Oh, yeah.
I think I had that almost like movie, you know, representation in my mind of, you know, it's like, not that I'm better than any of those people, but I was like, I don't have anything in common with them, you know.
Yeah.
And that was one of the biggest things when I finally did make it to AA. You know, Houston's got a great community. And I was like, man, I want to be half these guys, you know.
NA, of course, is a much newer program. And where it's good is very good. Where it's not as good, sometimes it can be almost detrimental because it gives people an attitude about what AA must be like because they've experienced a less than engaging NA program. It sounds to me like you started using pretty early. What was going on in your home life that kind of predicted you becoming an alcoholic years down the road?
I've tried to do a lot of family of origin work. There was a lot of chaos, you know, when I was younger. My parents had me when they were pretty young. My mom was 20, my dad was 25, I guess. Yeah. You know, like I said, my dad went from drugs and alcohol and stuff in his youth he went to the Air Force also. I know he spent 30 days in rehab in the Air Force.
Is that before you were born? Or?
Yeah, this was all before I was born. And then did a 180 and went into like ministry, went to Bible college and all this other stuff.
Is there a family history of any drug abuse or alcoholism?
Drugs and alcohol are part of my family story.
Yeah.
My brother's 4 years younger than me, and you know, I think that things were very difficult between my parents. You know, early. You know, there was a lot of problems, and my dad had his struggles. They say my brother saved the marriage, and you know, the way I've thought about that is, you know, they say I hear people, you know, 0 to 4, 5, 6, something like that is you know, the most formative years of your development. And thinking about, you know, what was happening between 0 and 4 for me, you know, and I have to caveat that with, like, I have great parents. They love me. They have done and would do anything for me, you know. And, you know, but they've had their own struggles, you know. It's been interesting as I've gotten more sober and I've done a lot of this work is being able to like look back at my family and know that they're broken people too, and that they have done the best that they could with what they had. You know, I don't think that they had the tools that I've fortunately been given. You know, it's like when they put me in rehab in high school, they didn't have that money. They had to pay cash for it.
Wow.
And, you know, and so it's like they took all their cash and they spent it on my rehab and put everything else on credit cards. And, you know, and so I've put them in bad situations really my entire life, you know.
Yeah, well, obviously they loved you very much to make that kind of sacrifice for you. And so the fact that they did that says a lot about the relationship, but also the power of the disease, and this, to the extent that even though you went into rehab, the results were not what I'm sure they were hoping for at the end.
No, they were actually worse. I, you know, when I got out, you know, I was getting drug tests and stuff like that, and I started using cocaine because that's out of your system in 3 days. I always say unless you do it every day, which is what I was doing, you know. But I transferred schools my senior year, they knew enough to not send me directly back to the high school that I left.
Yeah.
I transferred schools. And while my drugs got worse, my drug, habits, I've always thought that rehab, it did two things. One, it acknowledged that there was a problem. Like
Sure.
if you have to go to rehab, then, you're using more than most people.
Uh-huh.
And two, I think it put something in the back of my head and in my heart, whatever, that when it came time to get sober, that it was there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, we talk about the mustard seed and the fact that a seed was planted somewhere along the way, even if it wasn't cultivated over the years until a point at which you were ready for it. That's significant.
The story of me going to rehab was I did a lot of drugs at school. I viewed high school, I viewed as like 8 hours where I was not around my family and I could party. And so I did, I'd get high in the morning before going. I would skip lunch and school, do more drugs, and just.
Was this with a crowd of people like-minded?
I had a couple people, yeah. I mean, so I had a best friend growing up that it was me and him just through everything. But yeah, there was definitely the kids that somebody had lived across the street from the high school, and we would meet over there in the morning and, smoke before school started. And
we're talking about marijuana now for the most part.
Mostly marijuana, but I mean, I did a lot of pills.
Yeah.
I was always the guy, it's like if you found something at your parents' house and you didn't know what it was, give it to me, I'll take it and figure it out for you. We drank a lot, did a lot of drugs, and there was just nothing that I wouldn't try and nothing I wouldn't do. I had a very reckless disregard for life, consequences, anything. And by the grace of God, I have never been arrested. I have never gotten a DWI. I have never, for all the things that I have done, I've never been in any real trouble.
So how did your behavior demonstrate itself to such an extent that your parents would say, this kid's got to get some help? And how long did it take for them to get to that realization?
I bought my first bag of weed in 8th grade. And so, and was an addict immediately. And then in high school, it turned way up. There was problems, they knew that I was drinking and doing drugs and all this stuff. And then I had some stuff at school. Somebody snitched on me and said that, hey, Kyle's got drugs, whatever. And luckily it was some pills, and luckily I'd taken them. I get pulled out of class, and I'm high on several, I think it was Valium, but I didn't have anything on me. But the cops, they searched me and everything, and then they went out and searched my truck. And luckily my truck was parked off campus because they found about half a joint in my ashtray, underneath my ashtray. And they take me to the police station. I ended up they called my parents. I don't actually get in trouble.
More of a warning type thing.
Right. And that night I remember my dad just being like, I'm going to give you 30 days. And if you can't pass a drug test in 30 days, I don't remember what the threat was. I don't know if I'm going to be kicked out or, whatever. Because I was 16.
Yeah.
Yeah, 16. So I don't guess they could have kicked me out at 16. But anyway, whatever the threat was. And I just told him, I was like, I don't think I'm going to pass the drug test. I like getting high. I like doing drugs.
That's interesting. Most kids would have a tendency to want to try and lie their way out of it or finagle their way, but here you are being pretty much honest with them, huh?
I think it was just like, I know that I'm not going to pass this drug test. I know that I'm not ready. I know that, so whatever they were threatening. And so I was suspended from school. So, I couldn't go back to school the next day. And I remember my parents came and woke me up the next day. They were like, get up, get dressed. We're going somewhere. So, okay. And so they kept my brother home from school. And so the four of us go somewhere, to this building. And my parents go meet with somebody. It looks like a doctor's office type situation. And we're sitting there, and me and my brother, and there's two double doors secured by a key card, and there's like a little window in the door.
Yeah.
And I could see a line of kids walking in single file line, through the window. And I turned to my brother, I'm like, I think this is rehab. and so I go up to the front desk lady, I'm like, is this rehab? And she's like, where are your parents? And I was like, they're talking to somebody. She's like, I think you should sit down and wait on your parents. And I go sit down. I was like, I think this is rehab. And sure enough, it was. And so basically, they told me that after I had that conversation with them of like, I'm not going to not get high.
Right.
They're like, we have to do something. So I guess overnight, or in a very short period of time, they found somewhere. And so they left me there.
Wow.
And like I said, I did 30 days inpatient where I lived there. I went to school there. And then I did, 30 days outpatient, 8 to 8, Monday through Friday. And that was the second half of my junior year in high school.
What was that experience like for you in rehab?
I don't fully remember.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I remember being like, like, what the hell? I think part of me thought that I was above it. I mean, most of the people that I was in there were in there for meth. I grew up in Tennessee, in Memphis, and, right there in the corner of Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi, and, rural. Most of the people there were in there for meth. And I was like, I'm not a meth head. I was like, I smoke pot, do some pills, occasionally.
So already you're different. You're seeing the differences and none of the similarities.
Correct. And I think that a lot of them were poor. A lot of them, were from bad families, were from, there was a kid in there. I remember he said like, this was his like third time to OD at 17 years old, cooking crystal meth, shooting crystal meth. And I don't remember how much I acknowledged that like I have a real problem. Because like I said, as soon as I got out, I started doing coke, and pretty regularly. And, I was working at a restaurant, and it was me, my best friend, our general manager, and one of the other managers that we would, pool our resources and buy a bunch of cocaine. And
so when you say when you got out, is this after the 30 days or the 60 days?
After the 30 days, yeah. Because I was getting drug tests while I was in there. So, I was sober for a little bit.
Is that how you were proving to your folks that you weren't using, was the drug tests?
Yeah, I remember this one time, and this was when I was on coke, because I was getting the little home test, so for THC or whatever. I remember like my nose started bleeding in front of my dad. And so then my dad's like, you're doing coke. And I just went reverse psychology. Like, oh yeah, Dad, I'm doing coke. Like, yeah, of course you think that about me, just, doing the manipulation. How'd
it work?
It worked. I shamed, I just went so hard at him that my nose just started bleeding. And of course I'm not doing drugs, whether he believed me or just chose to back off that in that instance.
So here you are, you're 16 years old at that time?
Yeah.
16, 17? And you get out of rehab and, obviously your parents are treading pretty lightly because they want whatever happened to be ongoing value to you, let's say. But you get out and the first thing you do, you get a job, you start using cocaine on a regular basis?
Yes.
How were you keeping that and your continuing drug use from your parents' purview?
I think I did for a while. Then I don't think I probably was. And so I signed up for the Air Force. And so my parents knew that I was using again. And their goal was just to get me out of high school and into the military. Okay. And so I graduated at 17. And so I graduated in May of 2002. I turned 18 in July of 2002. And then I went to the Air Force in January of 2003. I remember I was failing my Algebra 2 class my senior year. And I just remember that my mom was basically calling and begging my Algebra 2 teacher, just give him a D.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to go to summer school. I wanted to drop out. It was my goal. I was like, I just want to drop out. Me and my buddy will get an apartment together and life will just be awesome.
Right. Your mother wasn't buying that.
Right. It would have been awesome until the first time rent was due,
Sure, yeah.
And so it was just like, just please. And she did. She made me come to tutoring sessions in the morning and stuff like that. But she ended up passing me. And by the grace of God, I graduated high school. But I graduated high school with a 1.4 GPA.
Yeah.
I mean, so it was very, just barely getting by.
So the goal was for your parents, let's get him out of high school, let's get him right into the military.
Yep.
Now you said your dad was in the military.
Yep.
So how were they viewing going into the Air Force and its likely impact on your drug use and your addiction?
I think they saw it as my only ticket out. I couldn't go to college. Like I said, I graduated high school with a 1.4 GPA. So I couldn't go to college. And even if I would have gone, I would have failed out. They just saw it as my one ticket. I mean, I have friends who are literally homeless now from when I was growing up, and most of my friends, I've smoked crack one time.
Yeah.
And it was right before I went in, and I did it, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. I mean, I was like, I understood it.
And then you couldn't get to it anymore.
Right. And so and most of my friends got into crack, meth, and that sort of thing after I left. And if I would have been there, I would have absolutely been in it. And something that's, for me, when I'm done with something, I'm done with it. Mm-hmm. And so when I went to the Air Force, I was just like, okay, I don't do drugs anymore. And I didn't do drugs. And it wasn't, now I drank a ton. Like, I stopped smoking cigarettes before I went to the Air Force. And it was just kind of like, all right, I don't smoke cigarettes anymore. And I didn't smoke, Yeah. It's weird that I have kind of this on-off switch in some ways.
Did you find, though, that your addictions or your usage of the drugs at the time just morphed into
alcoholism? Yes, for sure. For sure.
So, especially I think the Air Force, they've got this, and certainly the Navy and a few other branches of the service have reputations for, during off hours, you go straight to the bar or to the
yeah. And so, and that's the other thing. So I was stationed in North Dakota. We're an hour from the Canadian border, 2 hours from Winnipeg in Manitoba, and you can drink at 18 there. And so that probably made it even worse because we went to Canada every single weekend, and and we would just drink, and like I said, I was a blackout drinker. Mm-hmm. Things were bad, but the people around me were also heavy drinkers, and I had some crazy friends, and so it never felt like too much. I mean, it did, but it didn't. Until I ended up getting in trouble when I was in the Air Force for my drinking. I was on my way to deployment to Kyrgyzstan, and we stopped in Sicily, and we had 12 hours on the ground, and I was working the jet. I wasn't just a passenger.
Right.
I think we landed early in the morning, and then we were supposed to be ready to go at like 6 p.m. or something like that, And so we're like, oh, we're just going to go out for a little bit, And we go and we find this bar, and we just start drinking, and I get just wasted. I mean, I think I drank about a Budweiser and Jack Daniels, and then we're supposed to meet up at the hotel, checked out, ready to go back to the base, and I think it was like 6 o'clock, and then we couldn't find a ride, so we end up showing up back to the hotel at like 8 o'clock or something like that, very, very late. And the air crew's standing there, they're waiting on us, everybody. I stumble in, and I'm completely blacked out at this point. And they take me to my room, and they're like, all right, get dressed. We're going to go pack our bags and go get dressed. And when they come in, I'm passed out on the bed, and so they have to get me dressed. And then they take my wallet and they put it in my pocket, and they're in my cargo pocket, which is not where I keep my wallet. And so we go to we go downstairs, and I'm trying to check out of the hotel, and I'm like, I can't find my wallet, and I'm pulling stuff out of my bags and all this other stuff. Air crew's just standing there watching me, and someone's like, go help him. They come in, they're like, dude, we put your wallet in your pocket. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So I check out of the hotel. And then we get on the shuttle bus to go back to the base, and I pass out immediately. And this is where I came to. I came to security forces is standing over me, the police checking IDs at the gate, and they're like, sir, we need your ID. And I'm like, I can't find it. I'm looking, and they're like, dude, it's in your pocket. And but it's like if you get real drunk and then like something happens and you snap out of it, you're still drunk, but you
get a moment of clarity.
I had a moment of clarity. And so then I'm like, all right, I'm good, whatever. But it was too late at that point. And so they end up taking me to, we get off the bus, and they're just, my head crew chief is like, get on the plane, don't touch anything, just, go away. And, but then the captain, the pilot of the plane had gone home and called back to Grand Forks and was like, hey, we got a drunk crew chief. What should we do? And they're like, send him home. And so they get me off the plane. I take a flight from Sicily to Rota, Spain. And then I take a bus from Rota to Morone. Under different circumstances, it would have been nice. I took a bus across the Spanish countryside.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. You're blacked out.
But I was terrified, and I just remember when we got to the base, and I was going to catch a rotator back home, and I remember there's this master sergeant, and he's just like, I never met him before. I didn't know who he was, and he's just like, he's like, they're going to make an example out of you when you get home. And we'd had several alcohol-related incidents. People missed deployment, people get in trouble, and they were kind of like, we're going to put an end to this.
So you were the last straw for them, huh?
Yep. And so I remember I called home that night, and I tell my dad, and I tell my parents that they're going to hang me out to dry. They're going to make an example out of me and all this stuff. This is the love that my parents have for me. Is my dad, he hops in his truck. It's a 21 hour drive from Memphis to Grand Forks, North Dakota. My dad, he has long hair. He cut off his hair for a short haircut, shaved his goatee, and got in his car, and he drove to North Dakota. And because he had experience with the military and stuff like that, and he got a meeting with our chief, or my chief, and he was, and basically was just like, look, I'm not saying don't punish him. Like he deserves to be punished. He did wrong, but don't make an example out of him.
Which meant that they would have thrown the book at you.
Right. And they told me when I got off the plane, the police were there waiting on me and to escort me. And they took me to like the chief's office and stuff, and my dad was there. And it's funny because I remember being so mad at my dad, like, why would you do this? But my dad saved me. And
you were still drunk at this point?
No, I was sober. Okay, this was a couple of days later by the time I got,
right.
And so I ended up getting in trouble. Like I said, I got an Article 15, which is non-judicial punishment. So I lost a stripe, restricted to base for 30 days, there were some other punishments, but I didn't go to jail.
Which is good.
Which is what I think they wanted to do to me.
And they didn't throw you out of the service either.
And they didn't throw me out of the service, and so I've got an honorable discharge. I got my GI Bill. I got everything.
All for one evening of getting drunk.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. And it was frustrating, it's drinking was a big part of our culture.
Yeah.
And this is where I played the victim. I was like, well, everybody else gets drunk too, and all these other people. I mean, we've had pilots show up drunk, and so it's like, why am I being singled out, and, but I was drunk. I was very, very drunk. And so it ended up being a good thing for me.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying listening to my AA Recovery Interviews podcast, check out my latest audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories missing from the 3rd and 4th editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the third and fourth editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as they were when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. Have a free listen to Lost Stories of the Big Book on Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. It's also available as a Kindle book and in paperback from Amazon. While you're there, treat yourself to another audiobook I produced, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first printing of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a comfortable, meaningful, and engaging way to listen to the Big Book, anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. You're going to love it. And we're back.
So did your dad's intervention, did that mitigate the punishment?
It did. And that's what they told me. They said, they're like, I remember the chief being like, I've had a lot of parents call. I've never had any of them get in their car and show up. Yeah. And so I think I got the lesser of the punishment because my dad went and pleaded my case. And so like that's the conundrum I've had with my family of like, I have a family that would do all this for me.
Yeah.
But then there's been, a lot of issues growing up and a lot of anger and a lot of, and just this extreme dichotomy of who they are and how they show up.
So the natural gratitude that you would have for everything that happened is largely affected by what happened when you were younger and perhaps other things that went on, such that the gratitude almost feels like it doesn't need to be expressed because, well, you owe me this because of the way I got treated or whatever, so of course you're going to bail me out.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, especially as I think about my own kids now. And like, it's like, on one hand, I would not be here if it not have been for my family enabling me.
Yeah, true.
I would have been in jail. I would have been dead. I would have been somewhere. I would have, and so, but then also like they enabled me to do all these things, and so it's hard to know what the right answer is.
Well, and it's tough to know that, when it's a choice of enabling or die, enabling or prison, most people are willing to enable with the idea that, okay, we'll deal with this once in other words, you can't deal with it once the person's dead or once the person's in prison.
Yeah. Kick the can down the road and hopefully it gets better at some point.
Well, yeah. So is that what happened for you?
I think so. When I stopped drinking, the initial 5 years, the Air Force was no longer working for me.
Okay.
And so I'd originally signed up for 6 years.
Yeah.
And I got out a little after 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I had met Kristen and we were dating. Our first year was long distance. She's from Memphis.
Uh-huh.
And once I was sober, but like I said, I wasn't working a program or anything else like that, is all the partying and stuff like that and just not being able to do it was too much for me. I mean, I tell you, I was the worst DD ever. It's like I'd get people to the bar and then like 30 minutes later, be like, I got to go. I was like, dude, you got to get us home. I'm like, figure it out. I'm leaving, And this
you had a real attitude about it.
Yeah, and this was like pre-Uber and everything else like that. And I was just like, I can't be here.
Uh-huh.
And so I was just so uncomfortable in my own skin and knowing that I didn't want to drink, that I shouldn't drink, but not knowing how to do it. And so anyway, I was in from 03 to 07, height of the Iraqi war and everything. And they cut 40,000 Air Force slots to beef up Army and Marines.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided that I wanted to get out. And they had said, no, you can't get out. You're good at what you do. We've lost a lot of people. And so I find this regulation or whatever that you can apply for a miscellaneous separation. Basically just say, I want to get out. So I write a letter talking about, I want to get married. I want to go to college, and all this other stuff. And I'm literally in my desert uniforms on my way to Qatar. And I before I leave, I drop this packet off at personnel, and I'd had to route it through like all my supervisors. There's no, just all these no's. Nobody approved it. And so, but I go submit it anyway. I get on the plane and I go to Qatar. I'm over in Qatar for about 30 days, and I see my roommate. He's like, dude, you're getting out. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah. He's like, somebody had said that they wanted to get out too. And so I sprint to the nearest computer. And at the top of my inbox is my discharge paperwork from the Air Force. And so they had to like put me on a rotator back home. And I was out within a week or two at most when I got out. And it was what I needed at the time, you know? And so when I got out, I, you know, moved back home. Chris and I were getting more serious and all this other stuff. And like I said, I'm sober. And so my head is clearing, you know? And so then I started thinking about like, oh, well, what can I do? And it's just funny the way I can draw a straight line almost through all the things that have happened in my life and say that this led to this, is I apply at the University of Memphis and I don't get in. And I go up there and I'm like, hey, like I didn't get in. And they're like, have you seen your GPA? You know, like that 1.4 that I told you about. Yeah. And so I go to community college and I'm thinking like, oh, like I'll just transfer in, you know, to the University of Memphis. Well, I go to community college and I do great. I mean, I get straight A's, you know, and then, like I said, I'm starting to think like, well, what else can I do?
Yeah.
You know, and I thought I wanted to do finance. And so I go, I'm looking at Barnes and Noble, and I'm looking at top 10 schools by major. And University of Texas is the only one on there that's not like Ivy League or Michigan up north or something.
Sure.
And so I go home and I apply, and luckily I got in.
That's amazing.
And what's funny is I didn't have to send my high school transcripts till after I was accepted. And so me and my wife we got married. This is 2009.
Yeah.
We got married in March. We came down to Austin over the 4th of July. We never been there before. We rent an apartment. My wife had just graduated ultrasound school, but she didn't have a job. I was working at FedEx at the time, and I transferred to the Austin hub. But I was making $12 an hour, working 20 hours a week, you know, and ended up being the best thing that ever happened to us.
How did you view those coincidences? You know, that straight line that you were talking about, drawing through all these series of events that happened for you. At the time, how did you acknowledge them?
I don't think that I had the consciousness that I have now. I don't think that, I know I didn't. I don't think in the moment that I was like, oh man, glad I got that 1.4 in high school because now I'm going to the University of Texas. You know, I think it was just like, I'm just doing things. And, you know, I'm an extreme person, as many of us, you know, are. And it was just like, I mean, that's crazy. Like, I was like, I'm going to get into the University of Texas, you know? And it's funny, like, I didn't even realize what a big deal it was until I got there. People were like, you're an out-of-state transfer? I was like, yeah, I guess. You know, and when we went to Austin, we signed a year lease. I was like, we can do a year standing on our heads. I have always had a probably unhealthy risk tolerance, you know, from the time when I was doing drugs and everything else, that it's just like, we're just going to move to Austin with no jobs, no real savings, no nothing, and we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Which these days, when you say, now that you're sober, you might say, well, I'm just going to leave this in God's hands, and I will, you know, somehow we will get by.
Right.
Because I'm certain that God's got me covered on this.
Yeah.
Whereas at the time, what you're talking about is something like, you don't care enough about it to really let it bug you, and if it happens, it happens.
Right. I'm pretty good no matter where I'm at, you know, and like I can survive on most things, I can get by, you know, and I think that it was more just that I want to do things, and I had this grandiosity, you know.
So all of this was happening during this 5-year period. How far into going to school in Austin did you slip?
It wasn't even a slip. It was a conscious decision.
Okay.
And so my sophomore year, I had gotten a internship and in Houston, and it was going to be a salesy type role. There was going to be client dinners and those sort of things. And because of the way I felt, you know, it's like, I was like, I don't think I can like do this and not drink, you know? So I told Kristen, I said, well, you know, I was like, it's been almost 5 years. I was so young when I quit. I kind of want to try drinking again. And so we had discussions and all this. And so I tried drinking. It's funny, like I still have today on my fridge the beer cap of the first beer I drank. It was Budweiser. And in the moment, I was like, well, if this all goes to hell, we can point it back to here. And I took the beer cap and I put it on the fridge.
So this was 2009?
2010.
2010, you started drinking again after 5 years of being dry.
Yep. When I started drinking again, like previously, it was all blacked out all the time.
Right.
This time, there was just enough good times that I could justify it.
I get it. Yeah.
To where, like, you know, like, hey, let's have a glass of wine with dinner. And I don't black out. I don't do anything. Everything's fine. You know, but when things went bad, they went really bad. The blackouts, the anger, and most of it was directed at my wife, you know, and usually stemmed from her being like, are you sure you need 3 drinks? You know? Like,
how long did it take you to get to that point from the time you started drinking again?
The first incident happened very quickly.
So is it safe to say you picked up where you left off?
No. I mean, I had a lot of fun. There were some decent times, you know, and, you know, she was drinking, I was drinking, we were partying, we were going out, you know.
So the 5 years wasn't for nothing.
No.
Right.
No. And some of the behaviors that I exhibited when I was younger, I didn't do anymore. You know, just some of the real crazy stuff, you know.
Because you're a married man by that point.
Right. I'm a little older, a little wiser.
Did you have
married.
kids by that point?
No kids.
No kids.
And so, yeah, we went almost 6 or 7 years before we had kids of being married. So we got married at 24. And I think our first was born, when I was 31.
So all this is happening, this 6 years from the time you get married, you and your wife you're having your little tiffs and whatever else, and some of it could be as a result of the drinking and whatever else, but you still were essentially drinking without major consequences
No consequences. A lot of bad action.
Yeah.
But no real consequences.
Now, during that time, did you ever come to the point where you said, I think I ought to stop again?
I don't really think so. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier about the consciousness of not having of AA or other things. I don't think I ever tried quitting drinking really too much during that time. Now at the end, I started smoking a lot of weed and stuff like that to curb my drinking. You know, I've never blacked out on weed. I've never done, you know, but you know, so it was just like, I just partied a lot, you know, and that's how I viewed it, as like, I like to party. Every once in a while it gets out of whack. But what I didn't realize, and I lived under such delusion, is that like my marriage was falling apart. But, you know, she was building resentments against me, you know, very warranted. And for me, like, I would just be like, you know, I'd wake up the next day, like the nights where I would like freak out at her, yell at her, you know, whatever. I'd just like, I'm really sorry. You know,
did you black out those nights?
Yeah, okay, I had blacked out. I didn't remember. I wake up the next morning, I'm like, hey, babe, how's it going? She's like, no, you know.
Yeah, it's hard to have a sane discussion with someone when you blacked out. You don't remember it, but they do.
She's traumatized, and I'm just like, hey, babe, how's it going?
Yeah.
And
that hurts even more.
It does, because and that's what she would get so frustrated. Just like, I'm sitting over here like freaked out and angry and sad and mad and all this other stuff, and you're just like living in la la land that everything's fine.
What period of time was there between that and your entree into AA? When did things start to unravel?
We had been talking about marriage. She'd been trying to, hey, maybe we should go talk to somebody or whatever, and it just never seemed important to me. And then kind of at the end of 2018, we got into an argument. She's talking about stuff that's 5 years old, 7 years old, stuff like this. I literally laughed at her. I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, that's, you know, a decade ago. And she's obviously been sitting on it for all this time. And she finally is just like, you know, I just don't think I love you anymore. And I was like, you know, and this is the delusion I was talking about earlier. It's like, I remember thinking like, man, I feel bad for people in bad marriages. Like, that must suck. You know, mine's awesome and my life is awesome, you know, but I was that tornado sucking up everything around me, and just everything was done on my will and what I wanted. And, you know, and it's like, you know, I think about it, it's like sometimes it's like I moved out of my mom's house and with her, it's like, all right, now you get to take care of me, you know?
Geez, yeah,
and
I get it.
And so kind of after that fight, then all of a sudden I was like, you know what, we should go see somebody. Yeah, marriage counseling, we should do that. And so we start marriage counseling, and things are pretty bad, you know?
Was drinking coming up a lot in those marriage counseling sessions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And to layer over all this is I quit my job. I was in the corporate world.
Right.
And I quit my job to start a business. And so I went from making good money to making no money. When I think about, so I've been sober almost 3 years, but when I think about the last 6 or 7 years, if you look at all the things that have happened, it's like I quit my job, started a business, you know, or was part of another business, and that didn't work out. Started a new business. We had 2 kids that are 16 months apart. Trying to get sober, getting sober. And it's funny that this barely even makes, you know, a blip on the radar, but like in 2019, Kristen got super sick, was in the hospital for 10 days, off work for a month, ended up having her gallbladder taken out, but it was very scary. We'd had 2 small kids. Anyway, all these things, it's just like we've had so much happen. But so 2019 was the worst year of my life, hands down. We're doing marriage counseling, and it starts to get a little bit better. And then we go to Mexico in May of 2019 for our 10-year anniversary. And so we're there, we're drinking, and I get really drunk, and I'm like, we should get some cocaine. And my wife has never done any drugs. She's never done anything like that. And the thought that she was just like, oh yeah, that sounds great, you know, not to mention that I didn't know where to get it other than just walk around and be like, do you have cocaine? Do you have cocaine? You know, like, what are you talking about? You know? And we had kids at this point. We had, you know, and then I double down and I'm like, cause I'd done it a couple times. I was like, well, I've done it like twice and like, you know, not a big deal. And then I tripled down. I'm like, well, you were there and you didn't even know. And so just all hell breaks loose. And we're at this resort. I remember going to dinner, just being so drunk and so mad.
So you never did the cocaine?
No. That trip, man. So then we come back home and things really fall apart from there. And so I'm trying to get better. I start curbing my drinking. I start smoking a ton of weed.
Yeah, because you're trying to do it on your own.
Trying to do that, you know, and I'm like, all right, I cut out Jack Daniels, I cut out beer for the most part. I was like, all right, if I just drink Tito's and soda and wine, you know, then I'll be all right, you know. So anyway, so this whole time I'm like trying to get better. She wants to like separate and she wants to do all this other stuff. And I'm just like, nope, I can't do that. Like if we're getting separated, we're getting divorced. And, you know, she hangs on and I kind of just like, all right, like, look, I was like, I'll spend the rest of my life being the man that you want me to be and all these things. But I was like, I have to know that you're in this, you know, and finally I just can't get her to commit. And through this whole time, I haven't told anybody anything. This is all internal. And like, I was losing my mind. And
you had stopped going to counseling by this point?
We were still doing marriage counseling. I hadn't started individual therapy yet. And then finally I like call my parents and I'm like, I don't want them, the first time they hear about this is for me to be like, hey, I'm getting divorced. And this was in kind of like October, November of 2019.
Yeah.
And my mom, and we were supposed to go to Kristen's family for Thanksgiving. And once I told my parents, it all became real for me. And I was, and my hurt and my sadness and everything turned to anger. And I was, you know, and my mom was like, you know what, why don't you just come home for Thanksgiving, let her take the girls to the parents, her parents and her mom's house and whatever, and just come home. Y'all take a little break. So I tell Kristen, I'm like, I'm not going to Thanksgiving. And she's like, what? You can't do that? And I was like, no. I was like, you want to be a single mom? Be a single mom. Take those kids to the airport at 5 a.m. You know, like go tell your family why I'm not there. You know, just lashing out at her.
Yeah.
We sold our house and that kind of was like, I think a little wake up call for her a little bit.
And this is only about a little over a month before you get sober.
Yep.
There's a lot going on in this 6-week period, huh?
Yes. And so basically, we had decided to sell our house. And we found out that we were sitting on a pretty good amount of money. We had a house in the Heights. And, we were negotiating. I was like, I'll give you 2/3, you give me 1/3. But you got to sign away all the rights to my business and
So
all
you
this
guys
stuff.
were already in the process of
We were detangling ourselves from each other.
thinking of divorce at this
Yes.
point. I get it.
And so finally our marriage counselor was like, I think y'all need to start doing individual counseling. Like this is probably not going to go the way you think it's going to. And I remember I had this my first individual counseling session in November, like middle of November. And my hurt and sadness, it turned to anger. And I just go in there and I just unload for an hour. I bet I said 98% of the words. And the therapist's like, I think you should come back next week. Don't do anything, And so after that, I come home. Kristen's like, all right, do you, she's like, do you want to talk about therapy? You want to talk about it? And so I was like, okay. So we go sit on the couch and, and I'm just like, I was like, again, I was like, I'll be the man you need me to be, but I just need you to know that you're in this with me and all this. And she finally goes, okay, the family's the most important thing. And this is my spiritual experience.
Yeah.
We just start hugging and she's crying and I can feel the negative energy leaving both our bodies. I mean, it's tangible. And in the moment I said that, it's like we went from assured divorce to happier than we've ever been in 10 minutes. And we did.
Wow.
And in that moment, it was just like it was gone. It was like it was awesome. And it wasn't sexual, it wasn't anything. It was just this powerful moment. And, I remember like we went and got the girls from school. We went out to dinner. I think I was sleeping out on the couch at the time. Like that night I slept in the bed and it was just like all this, this sort of like euphoric, feeling.
Was knowing that you would need to stop drinking and smoking grass part of that experience?
I don't think so because I hadn't agreed to that.
That's interesting.
It was, I think for me, it was her just saying, okay, like, let's figure this out,
Her recommitting to the relationship, and so you had a starting point.
Right. Now, when that euphoric high wore off, there was a whole lot of problems. So what ultimately led me to AA is about 2 weeks after this spiritual experience, this miracle, is we had a Christmas party for this networking group that I used to be in. And so these are colleagues, at best, and again, I'm just drinking wine. I'm good. And so we go to this Christmas party and I start drinking wine. Next thing you know, I'm 5 glasses ahead of everybody. I black out. I try to fight a guy. I'm rummaging through the white elephant gifts looking for more alcohol. I make a real ass out of myself.
Sure.
And this is the first time that I've ever done this in a professional setting like this with people that aren't my friends that, like, not that they weren't my friends, but like, they weren't my boys, where it's like, where Kyle can just be crazy. And luckily, none of my anger was directed at her. And I just remember that the next morning I wake up, my kids, Daddy, play with me. And I'm like, Daddy's sick, And Kristen's just like, dude, you got a problem. I had such shame and embarrassment, and that was kind of my moment as to how I got into AA. So I have a marketing company, and I needed a photographer for a job. And this is, again, that straight line that I can, I ask a person, I'm like, hey, do you know any photographers? She gives me 3 names. I pick one of them. Because I like the name of his company. And we rode out to the job together. He says he doesn't drink and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, okay, cool. And it's like part of me is, because now in my business, it's like a lot of my work is done at bars, happy hours, networking events, things with lots of alcohol. And I was looking back on my previous experience from when the 5 years when I was sober and just being miserable. And so I'm just like, how do you run a business and not drink? And so anyway, after this Christmas party, I text this guy and I'm just like, hey, I remember you said you didn't drink. How do you run a business and not drink? And he's like, be at the AA club at 6:30 tomorrow morning.
Oh, wow.
And so I get up and the next morning I go to AA, and that's where, like I said, I had this, my view of AA in my mind was homeless people in the bottom of a dirty church, and then to walk into this club, which is nice. And these are successful, people. Not that that matters, but you get what, and just like, man, this is it. And so I stopped drinking, but I'm still smoking a ton of weed. And I'm really grappling with the idea of like, you mean sobriety, like forever?
Right.
So that's in December. And then we went home to Memphis the week in between Christmas and New Year's. And I drank a couple times. Me and Kristen went out one night. I drank with my brother. I drank,
And at that point, you didn't see it as slipping?
No, it was almost like a goodbye. It was a conscious decision to drink.
Had you gotten a sponsor by that time?
Nope. So I was just kind of going to meetings, but still smoking weed and
auditing it, so to speak.
Right.
Okay.
And just like, well, I can't drink right now. Then we came back from Memphis on New Year's Day, and it's like I left all my weed at home, at my parents' house. I left the drinks and everything. And it's like my obsession was lifted on the drive from Memphis to Houston, New Year's Day. The next day, I went in, second they opened the meeting, raised my hand and was kind of like, I'm here, I'm ready. And I was. And since that day, I've never struggled with the desire to drink or do drugs. What I've realized is like, I'm a crazy person, and my emotional sobriety has been a disaster.
It's hard to deal with that until you've dealt with your overall sobriety. And then once you deal with that, then you have the space to deal with the emotional and psychological and other issues that come up. So how long was it before you got yourself a sponsor, and what was his approach with you?
I got my first sponsor. It was pretty early. Yeah. I was so desperate because like my marriage was still falling apart.
Right.
Things were like, it wasn't like I got sober and Kristen was like, oh, I love you again. And I'm ready to, she was still very angry, still very hurt, very checked out of the marriage. And so I was just so desperate. And so whatever they told me to do, I was doing it. So I get a sponsor. He was very tough with me. Like not tough in like the beat me over the head with a big book type tough, but just like he would only listen to my babbling for so long, and honestly, this is where my life, this was one of the most impactful moments in my sobriety and in my, what kind of turned around my marriage and everything. I remember we were at breakfast one morning and I'm crying and I'm going on about, Kristen and what she did, and she doesn't want to stay married and this and that, whatever. And he looks at me, he's like, dude, shut up. He's like, you're exhausting. He's like, look, man, if you get divorced, the next 2 years are going to suck. He's like, but in 2 years, you'll have joint custody of your kids. You got your business. You'll probably be dating again. You're going to live. And it was like I will, won't I? And I even asked him, I was like, what? I was like, so your wife walks in the door and says she's leaving you and you're just like, cool, Godspeed, see you later. He's like, oh no. He's like, I'd be devastated. He's like, but if it gets to the point she walks in the door and tells me she's leaving me, no amount of crying, begging, pleading, anything else is going to make her stay. And if she does stay, she's just going to have one foot out the door. And it was just like this total shift in my view of my life, my marriage, everything else. Is I actually went home and canceled marriage counseling from that meeting and was like, you need to figure out what you're going to do. I'm just going to be over here being awesome. It was very ego driven. I was like, I'm going to be so awesome. It's going to be awkward for you that you don't love me.
Oh boy.
And I'm not saying that was a healthy approach,
sure.
but it's what I did. But by taking the pressure off her to figure out what she wanted to do, created space for her to do what she needed to do. Yeah. It was due to a hole in her heart that I had caused from being a bad husband for so long. And that I had to take that responsibility and give her the space while I stayed sober.
Yeah. And that would probably be a big part of her ability to get through that.
Yeah.
Is that knowing that you're staying sober.
Coming up on 3 years of sobriety now is, I would say, just in the last 6 months that things have been good, like really good. And not just relatively good, well, like relative to what it was before, right, but like actually good. And she's done a ton of work on herself. And that's one of the biggest things that I got out of this, was that I had to do my work regardless of what she was going to do. And I think that this is where, my codependency, my family upbringing, like nobody in my family's divorced.
Right.
Things have not been great, but it's just people don't get divorced, And so, I remember thinking like at one time, like, I don't care how miserable we are, we're going to stay married, And then I even came to a point where it's like, well, if you need to move on, like, I understand, and was able to like kind of give that peace. And obviously I didn't want to. We had kids in the mix. Yeah. We had, and I think for me, like as far as my bottom, when I was like, I'm literally about to lose my family. Yeah. And I just couldn't imagine my kids not being a part of their lives on a daily basis. And it was just like, nope, can't do it. Being able to just do all this work. I've done a lot of work.
Sounds like an awakening.
It was.
When did you make that transition from it being about your ego to it being about a power greater than yourself?
I would say in the last year or so. So my dad is a preacher, and I grew up with him in the church, and have had a ton of resentments against organized religion and the people. I could never get to God through the people. I'd be like, I remember like growing up, it's like, oh, well, you can't do that. You're the preacher's kid, whatever. And so I could not even hear God. I could not talk about it. I couldn't, honestly, like when I had that spiritual experience, my burning bush moment, the thing that happened with me and Kristen, it's like all my questions just didn't matter anymore. And I really started to soften on that. And coming into AA, where it's not religious, it's spiritual, and God of your understanding, and what do you, however you interpret that, and being able to come at it from that way. And it's not just a list of rules, do this, don't do this, blah, blah, blah. It's just my heart started to soften. And I finally just was like, it doesn't matter how you act, if you profess to be a Christian, or how you do, or, whatever, like that's irrelevant. And this is probably where the consciousness of that straight line started to come in. Yeah. Of just like, man, the fact that I've never been to jail, the fact that if I hadn't almost failed high school, I probably wouldn't have got into UT, because if I would have just gone to Memphis, there would have been no reason to do that. If I hadn't, just like all these different things, from 3 Given and the guys in AA, just like all these things, it's very up and down, but it's very linear. Yeah.
You get to see the difference. You firsthand, you get to experience the difference between coincidences and how God is actually working in your life. And to me, I needed to see that before I could really feel like I was spiritually connected. Do you feel spiritually connected these days?
Yeah, very much so. Like Kristen has always been like a Christian, and, grown up in the church, and, that was always one of our biggest points of contention. And I would just be like, I'm not going to pray. I'm not going to, because I struggle with not being authentic, and it's like, well, I don't feel it. So therefore I'm not just going to pray, so it makes you feel good, or I'm not going to talk about God, whatever. But now it's like, I'll say prayers with my kids. We go to church almost every Sunday, and it's become, it's really spiritual. It's not the religious aspect of it. It's not but it's just, I believe in God. I don't always know what that is, but I believe there's something there, someone there.
So how has that manifested itself in terms of service work and what you've done to make sure that you stay in the center of the program?
I actually did slip out of the center. I didn't relapse or anything, but I went from like meetings 7 days a week to probably a 6 to 9 month period with almost no meetings. I think that I had thought that like I had people around me in AA, and I think I was trying to put that in place of meetings, and almost just thinking like, maybe I don't need it, or I am good. But then I looked up one day and realized that like, again, like, oh no, this is not good for me. And just seeing that things weren't going very well. And I don't necessarily think I was any closer to drinking, other than I guess you're always closer to drinking, but I was never I never wanted to drink in that time, but I realized that my mental and emotional sobriety was getting very out of whack. And so I decided to do 90 and 90 again. And so I'm about a week away from finishing that. And so that's where starting to come to all these different meetings. And I'd only gone to one meeting in the morning, and then my kids started being at school. So that meeting didn't work for me anymore. And so that was part of it also. And I hadn't branched out. So now in this next iteration of my sobriety, I go to meetings all over the place at various times.
Yeah.
And I pray to God that I never feel like I don't need it anymore. And I've really enjoyed being back in the herd at the center. But it has been weird because, with having the 3 years, but not having the same level of camaraderie and people knowing me and me knowing them at the same level I did when I was going to meetings 7 days a week at the same meeting. Like a lot of times people are like, oh, like how much time you got? And I'm like, oh, 3 years. And they're like, almost like expecting me to say 3 months, because they've never seen me before. And so getting back into it it's been, in a lot of ways, I felt like a newcomer again.
Well, it's a lot about accountability too. In other words, even though, and I find this all the time where people say, I don't go to as many meetings as I used to, but I talk to a sober alcoholic at least twice a day, and I still call my sponsor, and I still read, and I still pray. But nothing, absolutely nothing takes the place of a meeting, because a meeting is a commitment to physically take your body to a place where you are in Alcoholics Anonymous, and to a place where you will not be able to order a drink. That kind of accountability, but to wait for other people to hold you accountable when you're not holding yourself accountable is an illusion, because most people are glad to still hear from you. Are you going to meetings, Kyle? No. Well, okay, I hope you get back to meetings. But sooner or later, what you're talking about will occur. So my wish and hope for you is that you continue at the end of the 90 days to go for another 90 days, come up with some other commitments. I know that you've started to do some service work in another meeting that we go to. You're kind of the AV guy for our hybrid meetings, which is very cool. Have you sponsored anybody yet?
I've sponsored one guy who's gone through the steps all the way and is doing awesome. I'm just getting started with another. The end of the 90 and 90 is not like I'm going back to no meetings. And it's been awesome finding a bunch of new meetings that, and basically like what my goal was with the 90-90 is like, it's like you hear like, oh, that's a good meeting. Oh, that's a good meeting, is going and checking out those meetings.
Well, that's how I did it early on. And because I was in charge of my own schedule, I could go to noon meetings especially. And the good thing about noon meetings are that they're transparent to what's going on at home. So I'm not taking myself away from my wife and children if I'm going in the middle of my business day. And the cool thing about noon meetings is no matter how bad my mornings are or how bad my afternoons might be, I have a place of solace and comfort and security and commitment during the lunch hour. So I've done several podcasts so far where there have been people who had the same experience as you. And some of them have considerable years and years of sobriety, where for periods of years they didn't go, but they stayed sober and they stayed connected with some of the people. It gave the illusion of them still being committed. Sounds to me like you had that illusion, and somewhere along that way, that illusion got smashed to the reality that you have to be there.
Yeah, and that's been one of the great things about coming to the Thursday meeting. I bet the average sobriety's got to be 15, 20 years,
But look at how many guys in the room today had less than 30 days. In other words, whenever they say, is anybody brand new? And if there is somebody who is their first meeting, then they turn the focus to that guy and on the first step. My feeling always is, I'd rather know how many people are under 30 days, because whatever is said for that new guy when there's a brand new guy in the room, most of it still applies to the people with less than 30 days. Whatever is being said to try and encourage that person with 1 day to come back still applies to guys who've had 14 or 23 days or whatever else. So
for me, the person with 30 years, 40 years, whatever, still needs to come to regular meetings than me with less than 3 that I do too. I think one of the biggest things that I've had, like my biggest growth, loving myself. And that has been, so critical of myself and so negative and so I have a different standard for me than I have for you or anybody else. And
That's not unusual for us alcoholics.
To be able to accept myself for where I'm at and, you know, the things that I've done and that just like knowing that God has got me, all these things, that it's a miracle, you know, that we've survived, that my marriage is stronger than it's ever been. I've seen my kids change, you know, they're still young, 5 and 6. They've really changed, you know, and I don't yell as much, and we're able to have conversations and talk about their feelings. And
yeah, that's the growth that comes from ongoing sobriety and staying in the middle of the program. I've really enjoyed the interview. This interview has been really important for me because it's more raw-edged than a lot of interviews I do, with a guy who is right in the midst of all these things coming to fruition in his life, and that's very cool. And my commitment to you is to make sure that whenever I see you, I acknowledge that commitment, and that you're a good man, you're a good husband, you're a good father, you're a good member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love you. And all of those things mean a lot, and that's a good thing. So I want to thank you again for doing this.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate that.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. I want to thank my guest, Kyle G., for sharing his story. And thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? And leave us a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts if you have the time. Of course, you can listen to many more interviews in this series by following the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, and other podcast providers. Or tell Siri, Google Assistant, or Alexa, play AA Recovery Interviews podcast. Or visit our website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, to hear every show, share your comments, and also contact us. If you want to email me directly, it's Howard at aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.